este año, esta tercera edición de la Asamblea Global de Privacidad 2021, tiene como eje temático la privacidad y la protección de datos. Un enfoque centrado en el ser humano en este foro internacional, cual congrega a especialistas y autoridades en la materia de distintas partes del mundo. Se están tratando temas sumamente relevantes de forma coordinada, ello con la finalidad de sumar esfuerzos para garantizar el derecho fundamental a la protección de los datos personales a nivel global. Saludo muchísimo gusto a nuestros panelistas, Carmela González Troncoso, Massimo Marelli, José Luis Rodríguez Álvarez y a Mariana Salazar Albornoz. Muchas gracias de verdad por acompañarnos. El tema de la presente sesión corresponde a la protección de los datos personales en el marco de la Agenda 2030 de las Naciones Unidas. Recordemos que en el año 2015 se aprobó la Agenda 2030 por parte de la Organización de las Naciones Unidas, que plantea 17 objetivos principales, con 169 metas de carácter multidisciplinario, que abarcan aspectos económicos y sociales. Los ejes centrales se enfocan en las principales problemáticas del mundo, como la eliminación de la pobreza, acciones para combatir el cambio climático, la educación, la reducción de desigualdades, inclusión, así como la reestructura del diseño de las sociedades, básicamente en los derechos fundamentales. Al respecto, consideramos que el marco normativo de protección de datos personales es esencial para la protección de los derechos humanos por su interdependencia, al constituirse como un derecho fundamental a través del cual se potencializa el alcance de otros derechos en el entendido de la salvaguarda de la información que identifica
This is our way to safeguard the information and to identify the people who attribute to these characteristics. And based on that, based on our initiative to protect human rights to privacy and to finally achieve this objective for sustainable development, we will always be participating in this experience and look for constant expansion. So that I would like to say that the right to protection of personal data
sostenibles, el cual tiene como propósito el promover sociedades pacíficas e inclusivas para el desarrollo sostenible, proporcionar acceso a la justicia para todos y para todas, y construir instituciones eficaces, responsables e inclusivas en todos los niveles. Dentro de este se encuentra el objetivo 16.9 sobre identidad. Este prevé que para el 2030 se proporcione identidad legal para todas y para todos, incluido el registro de nacimiento. Asimismo, tal y como lo contempla la hoja de...
And the way it was established in our route that we are trying to avoid the discrimination based on race, gender, ethnic origins, and so on, and to persist in that initiative in order to establish this commitment and relation among nations. So this is our commitment to reduce the poverty and to give this feeling of enrichment, and this is our global approach. And here are our specialists that are with us today. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, our objective to achieve these SDGs was compromised, and nowadays the governments to a certain measure are trying to accomplish those objectives. and to reach those goals. And this is information that allows us to identify and to get to know the needs of our population and to uh, help them to get this social benefit. It is crucial for us that the right to protect the personal data is one of the parts of our regulatory frame based on this system of human rights protection and guarantee. It is one of the principles established by United Nations organization that we aim to reach. It is crucial for us to implement the public policies and to see the way to accomplish and to reach our goals to guarantee all the human rights of all the people in the world, especially the cultural ones, the fundamental ones. This is the dependence that exists between people and their identity, and that way we are looking for those accomplishments. On the way towards Agenda 2030 for sustainable development and accomplishment of sustainable development goals and regulatory frames in the area of privacy and data protection, this is our new normality that has no precedence in terms of information protection. So it is important to guarantee and to safeguard the personal data. Among other rights, we need to protect their privacy. The authority in this area, we understand the challenges that we face during this health situation, and the demand for information in public sector is important, and we are trying to coordinate our efforts in order to control. And well, based on that, I would like to share with you that this session will be carried out the following way. First of all, we will have the presentation of our distinguished guests for about 10 minutes. In the second place, we will have this space in order for us to reflect and to think about, to look for the answers to our questions within this 2030 agenda framework. So, our speakers will have a second presentation about 5 minutes, and then there will be a reception. We will receive the questions from our public. So there will be a Q&A session through our chat box, and then we will share our final notes. Now I would like to introduce our speakers. Please allow me to introduce our distinguished speakers. First of all, Carmela Gonzalez Troncos is with us. She's head of Spring Lab and assistant professor at EPFL Switzerland. And also, she's been working with Madrid Institute, and since November 2017, she is an assistant in Polytechnic General School in Lausanne, Switzerland. Her team is about 20 people from all the from different European cities that look for the protection of personal data. Also, she has signed the letter to avoid technical difficulties during this COVID-19 situation and to find a solution in order to provide surveillance and to avoid this catastrophic situation. Carmela, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. So, what I wanted to talk about today is that when we think about privacy and why do we do privacy, we tend to talk about it as a goal. But privacy is not the goal. Privacy is the means that we have to protect individuals and society from harms such as surveillance, such as intervention, such as manipulation. When we keep information for ourselves, it's not for the sake of it. It's really because we fear what others can do with this information. And it is important when we deploy technology to reflect about whether the technology we're deploying is increasing these risks or is decreasing them. So let's think about the technologies that appeared in this emergency situation that we had during the last 2 years. We heard a lot of let's build an app that let's build some machine learning, some data-driven technology that will predict something. And when we think about it, what we need to think is that an app or machine learning do not exist in the vacuum. They do not exist in the ether. To build these technologies, we need to build infrastructures. Apps live on phones that are connected through networks to servers that do operations. These servers may be on a cloud that is owned by a service provider. When we build machine learning pipelines, this is the same, right? We have the data maybe we collect it through phones, maybe the data is in different databases, but we need to collect it again through a network that would go to a server that does operations, that communicates with other servers. And why am I talking about this infrastructure? Because infrastructure is important, because it changes the risk and the risk calculation. When we think about infrastructures, applications and apps change, they move, we can delete them, but infrastructures stay. Infrastructures are like roads are actually kind of very common infrastructure we use, and we live in the road, right? It's not that when the road stops being used, the road disappears. The road stays there, and there is still people using it, and it can change the use. Digital infrastructures are the same. Once they are built, if you build them, they will come. And we have seen actually how technologies built in this emergency time have become infrastructures with different uses. So we saw first started doing contact tracing and the collection of data, not even from a digital way, just on paper, right? You would go to a bar, write your name there, and we saw how that data there was infrastructure, in this case a paper-based one, and was used, for instance, for bartenders to stock customers. But that was also used by law enforcement, like in Germany, where law enforcement claimed access to these databases of paper to investigate crime. And then we moved to the digital world, and this happened again. We saw how after these apps, this infrastructure will be built, and after in many countries it was promised on privacy, we saw how implementations like the one in Singapore or Australia were again tapped by law enforcement to investigate crime. In our case, and in many countries in Europe, in North America, the apps were developed actually with much more protections, a protocol that we developed that avoid this misuse. But we still saw how the minimal opportunity of these infrastructures happening and the data going around, they could be misused. And we see how this repeats. The next technology we had for the emergency was the COVID passport. And COVID passports were supposed to be, safe, keep people safe. It is true that reducing movement and making safer movements reduces the chances of infection. But now what happened is that we see how these COVID passports start to become a tool to control immigration. We see, for instance, how in the UK there starts to be claimed that these passports are starting to be used to actually kind of manage the flows of who can go where. Like African countries, for instance, cannot move. There's no African country on the list. We also see how countries start to say that these passports actually start to affect, for instance, commerce and trade, because who can travel where can also change, like who can actually make business. And we see also how India starts to complain because they cannot travel everywhere because of these COVID passports, which actually has a reflection of the business. And again, we see how a technology depends on infrastructure. In this case, an infrastructure that is just, a tool to just check for anything. Anything that my country can sign digitally can be now checked by any other one. And we see how this infrastructure starts to expand. And actually, countries start to have new kind of things that may actually be embedded in this COVID passports. Because once we have built the infrastructure, they will come. And so far, maybe I have talked about technologies that are maybe we consider them not privacy preserving, but even technologies that are privacy preserving, like in the last month, we have seen a lot around client-side scanning and the detection of CSAM, children's sex and abuse material, and how, for instance, Apple proposed a privacy-preserving way of doing this. How this works is that there would be a list of illegitimate material sent to our phones. The phones locally, in an encrypted manner, do search, and then if they find some illegal material, they would notify law enforcement or Apple in this case. Now the problem is that even if this is very privacy preserving, once the infrastructure is there, we have no control over it. We have no way of controlling that the next time that some list is going to be sent to our phone, it's not going to be about terrorists or whatever country is a terrorist, activists, or some forbidden material in a particular country like LGBT, for instance. We have no way of doing this. And what I'm saying with all of this is that when we think about the power of technology and how good it is and the benefit it brings, we also need to think about the risks that it brings. Technology had great potential for the pandemic to make great things, but it also did a lot of damage. And in the future, if we really want to go to these sustainable goals, we need to think about every time we put a technology forward, what is the potential for harm, and weight the harms versus the benefits. And not only think about the technology and as this kind of abstract way like an app, but actually think about the infrastructure, what we will have to build to put this technology in place, and how that will change the balance of power and the capability of citizens to protect their rights. Thank you very much.
National Institute of Transparency, Access to Information and Protection of Personal Data, and to the Global Privacy Assembly Executive Committee for the invitation to participate in this panel. As mentioned in the introduction to this panel, and by Carmela also, the topic on the correlation between the protection of personal data and the achievement of the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is one of utmost importance. And this importance has been exacerbated in light of the current global health emergency we have been living since 2020 as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'd like to highlight the latest 2021 SDG report, which mentions that the pandemic has halted and reversed decades of advancements in reaching the 17 Sustainable Development Goals by the 2030 deadline. Among others, and as I'm sure you are very much aware, the global extreme poverty rate rose for the first time in 20 years. 101 million additional children have fallen below the minimum reading proficiency level. The crisis has threatened the livelihoods of 1.6 billion workers in the informal economy. Gender inequalities, domestic violence have all risen, and the climate crisis persists. Financial challenges for developing countries especially have also risen, and inequalities within and among countries have also intensified. And this has been seen also in the unequal distribution of vaccines throughout the world. Data plays an essential role in the advancement of the 2030 agenda, and this has been stated in the agenda itself. where it says that quality, accessible, timely, reliable, disaggregated data is needed to progress. But also, pandemic has brought with it, as mentioned by Carmela, an acceleration of technology, with the risks that implies. Therefore, in the very much needed of efforts towards achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, new and innovative methods and technologies to collect, use, and process data to monitor these development goals are emerging. This comes with an accompanying concern of the risks associated with handling and processing of this data. This technological upsurge collection necessarily then has to be accompanied with proper knowledge, dissemination, and compliance of relevant and applicable international standards regarding the protection of privacy. And this must be done not only by states and public authorities, but also by private entities. There has been a true proliferation of legal frameworks regarding privacy, a positive thing. More and more countries are understanding the need to adopt or update their privacy laws, to install data protection authorities, and businesses are also understanding more and more the need to be responsible and ethical in the way they treat the data they collect. At the international level, legal frameworks are more and more robust. At the UN, I'm sure some of the framework, the UN guidance and principles the UN has developed. I would like to share with you the Inter-American Organization of America, a recent development that is really relevant in the region. As you all know, the Inter-American does not have a binding convention similar to GDPR in Europe regarding privacy data protection. However, there are some standards adopted by the the Ibero-American Network for Data Protection, of some protection agencies, and of the American states and also of some European countries. Within the organization of we prepared a first set of principles in the year 2012. And we updated those in 2015. And those principles are accompanied by a legislative guide, by annotations that are intended to help states when they are updating and adopting their national laws on data protection. Given the very important developments in the international arena since 2015 to this day, the Inter-American Data Code received a mandate from the General Assembly of the Organization of American States and took upon itself of updating these principles and these annotations. I am happy to share with you that we adopted these principles and these annotations in this year 2021. And not only that, we also submitted them to the General Assembly of the Organization of American States so that the next assembly, which is in November, may adopt these principles. These are 13 principles that regard to the topics that we are all familiar with: purposes, transparency, consent, relevance and necessity, limited processing and retention, confidentiality, security, accuracy of data, rectification, erasure, objection, accessibility, sensitive personal data, accountability, transport flow, exceptions, and data protection authority. These 13 principles, as they stand today, are already a reflection of the new Inter-American region because we have gone through consultation within the American region. We've received views from Argentina, Colombia, Mexico, Paraguay, Uruguay, the Inter-American Commission of Work, the International Committee of the Red Cross, and the Ibero-American Data Furthermore, we received from the United States Federal Trade Commission. Therefore, this is a advancement, and we look forward to states adopting these principles in November as a political movement towards convergence in international standards applicable to our region. Thank you.
So first of all, I would like to express as well my gratitude for the invitation to discuss on this important occasion of the Global Privacy Assembly, a topic that is really very fundamental for the work and for the phase in which we are. I wanted to start with a few thoughts and a few words, maybe with an introduction as to my work and the organization that I work for, because it's probably not the most usual angle to come from looking at the work of the UN Agenda 2030 as an organization that works primarily in emergency, like the ICRC. The ICRC is a neutral, impartial, independent organization that has the exclusively humanitarian mission of protecting the life and the dignity of victims of armed conflicts and other situations of violence. So the element of having to work, we've been doing now for over 150 years in humanitarian emergencies, make it very clear that for us the protection of individuals involves also the protection of their information, and the upholding of individuals' dignity very often goes through the protection of their data and also treating their data with dignity. I think it's really important to stress that in a world where we find ourselves today with technology and pervasiveness of digital makes the protection of personal data very relevant, personal data protection and privacy, as an important lens to help us dissect technologies, understand data flows, understand what new stakeholders may be involved in the development and the use of these technologies, and a lens that is fundamental in order to fully understand what is required to do no harm in a digital environment and to uphold the dignity of individuals. So technologies are actually just as relevant in humanitarian emergencies as they are in our own life experience, if not more. If we see the challenges that we're facing in humanitarian emergencies these days, we can clearly see how technology could really be of significant help. As an organization, we have access to every conflict thanks to the trust and the access that we can basically gain through bilateral confidential dialogue with all the stakeholders in conflict. And today, with the complexity of conflict, it's getting even more difficult and complicated to really identify who to speak to. Fragmented conflict, often radicalized, splinter groups, and AI and machine learning being presented as tools that can be helpful in identify and improve our situational awareness. We also know that technology can help us to complement our physical proximity with digital proximity and enables us to be reached, just to have to reach people, allows people to leverage new resilience mechanisms that digital platforms can offer and consume digital services digitally, just like they consume other services digitally. We find ourselves in protracted crisis, conflicts that last longer and longer, and we know that our 10 most important operations have been lasting for an average of more than 40 years. So in this kind of settings, being efficient and effective, avoiding duplication, aid diversion, aid efficiencies in protracted crisis, has often led humanitarian organizations to rush and deploy biometric data and use of digital technology. So technology is useful and can be useful in humanitarian emergencies just as much, if not more, as it can be useful in our daily experience of technology. But because of the vulnerability and the volatility of the security and the environments in which we work, humanitarian contexts do show us in the extreme what negative consequences can arise for people if the technologies in questions are not properly assessed or deployed too hastily. And here, as I said, really data protection. I don't want to go into too much detail in relation to all the activities that have been carried forward in order to tackle these precise challenges, but in essence, we've been looking at creating a data protection regulatory framework within the organization, creating a multi-stakeholder group and try to convene from humanitarian organizations, data protection authorities and privacy commissioners, civil society, academia, the tech sector, in order to develop guidance on the responsible use of technologies that then led to the handbook of data protection in humanitarian action. And of course, the Global Privacy Assembly is very familiar with this work because it's closely associated through the working group that was established with the resolution of the Global Privacy Assembly on this topic. We've been working on training with the University of Maastricht, with Lausanne Polytechnic, with Zurich Polytechnic, on data protection, on new technologies. And we've been pushing for research and development where current state of the art means that technology is not fit for purpose. And here, what we're doing with Carmelo, for example, in Lausanne on biometrics is a perfect example. We've also tried to mobilize the international community around important topics, such as the resolution that we pushed for on the adoption of restoring family links and privacy at the International Conference of the Red Cross and the Red Crescent in 2019. So it's clear for us that being here to bring these topics is a very important opportunity, and we're very grateful to have a chance to discuss and to engage further in the topic of today.
Okay, so sorry about that. Mila, can you just, in the few minutes that we got, can you just talk us about your experience with the objectives of the UN and your work and what you have been doing with this, please?
Yes, sure. Thank you. And can you confirm you can hear me this time?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Wonderful. Thank you very much to the organizers and the hosts for inviting us to be part of this important. Great to see that we're discussing the 2030 agenda and the UN Sustainable Development Goals, as well as the privacy is an important notion in the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Privacy has been on the agenda of the United Nations for quite a while, and does make an important part in the achievement of the SDGs. In 2017, we started our work specifically dedicated to data protection and privacy in the context of the achievement of the 2030 agenda. And just back then, over 34 agencies have come together to develop a guidance that was eventually adopted to develop a guidance on big data for the 2030 agenda, discussing issues of privacy, data protection, and also ethics. And at that time, it has extended beyond just mere questions and standard solutions around privacy and data protection, but also went into the questions of group harms and group privacy, as well as the narrow and kind of gray areas where we are working with large amounts of data, and not all of the data is directly or personally identifiable, but still at the risk of harming vulnerable populations, vulnerable identifiable populations. So with that, I want to say a few words about Global Pulse and the reason why we talked about big data in the context of the 2030 agenda. Global Pulse is a special initiative of the UN Secretary General, and I'm a policy and data policy and data governance, as well as a privacy specialist, and been there since 2012. So I've had an experience of seeing how privacy as a notion across the United Nations, as well as through the entire international public sector, has emerged and developed. And I can say that as we are looking back for years, a decade ago, and where we are now, the data protection has become much more of a topic of discourse across many different sectors, but certainly in the international public sector, because especially with the topic of this discussion, the 2030 agenda, but also with the present situation that we're all experiencing and are in of COVID-19, of course. And the United Nations being at the center of all in the response to the pandemic, and of course with the World Health Organization, which I wish was part of also of this panel, that is at the core of these discussions. So Global Pulse has been working with the World Health organization, and as well as other specialized agencies across the United Nations system. And we've been leading the work on across the system on the privacy that with respect to the United Nations Privacy Policy Group, which is a working group of all United Nations agencies, specialized agencies, as well as funds and programs, to come and talk about the issues of importance that relate to privacy and data protection. And just last year, we have issued a statement, the joint statement on privacy and COVID-19, and how the United Nations should be handling data protection when it comes down to the collection and processing of personal information. I don't think there is any surprises in terms of the principles that have been followed in the joint statement and the recommendations that come as a joint effort from all of the United Nations organizations. But also, I think what is important to note is that this statement comes in light of the principles that have also been adopted in 2018 on privacy and data protection, and they have been adopted by the one of the special committees of the United Nations, the high-level Committee on Management. So going back to the privacy and COVID-19, as well as in the context of the 2030 agenda, of course, we've been set back significantly with the achievement of the SDGs. However, as not ever before, we are faced with this issue. Can we use the technology? And there's definitely a big and a very defined answer that we should be using technology and data for good, and specifically in the context of addressing the issues that have come up during the COVID-19 pandemic. The truth is that we were not ready of using data and technology to its fullest and potential extent to address this topic, and not even now, a year after, we are. I think our goal is that in the coming years is to be much more and better prepared, including, given the topic of this panel, on the issues of governance of data, because that was not the only, but one of the hurdles that we've noticed when it came down to accessing and then further processing of data when it came down to fighting COVID-19 pandemic. Many, and I'm not speaking for any specific nations, I'm talking about for the overall global approach to how data has been used. Because so many have raised issues, including in the human rights context, the issues of trust. And that brings me to another point of the recently, just this month, common agenda of the UN Secretary General, which speaks about the priorities. And one of the biggest priorities is to make sure that we reestablish trust in many of the areas, but it also concerns in the area, of course, that relates to digital cooperation, especially in view of where data can support major humanitarian issues such as COVID-19. That also brings me to another point, is that just a year and a half ago, the Secretary General has established a high-level panel on digital cooperation. And the high-level panel on digital cooperation, just pre-pandemic, came out with a list of interesting recommendations. Amongst many of such were access to data and ensuring we have access to quality data that follows proper human rights protections, primarily the right to privacy. And we work closely with the Office of High Commissioner on Human Rights to ensure that when we send the message that requires collection of data, that it always comes hand in hand with the protection of privacy, because the message is important, and we need to make sure that whenever we are talking about access to data and digital cooperation, we need to rebuild and build trust across vulnerable populations, across all of us in a way. And as it comes down to the UN, and specifically UN Global Pulse, we worked and keep working in the Global South, and currently are working with supporting 2 governments in Africa to develop, Ghana and Uganda specifically, to develop a framework which calls for the establishment of data markets. And as we are supporting governments across the world to develop access to more reliable and quality data, the goal behind all of this is to also establish proper data governance frameworks for the data sharing that could essentially support national priorities in the right and respectful way. So I'm happy to speak about these projects later on, but I think the importance of the message today is to talk about not only the right to privacy, but also the right of us to be able to use data in the right way, and making sure that as we are following this approach of access to data in a responsible and privacy protective manner, we're also talking about rebuilding trust and providing more awareness on the side of the public, where data is looked at as the common public good. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mila. Massimo, do you have also some experience regarding data and the use of it in far areas that have humanitarian issues? Can you talk us about that?
Thank you. I mean, yes, of course, we've been processing lots of sensitive information about affected communities for a long time in order precisely to enable to perform our mandate and to provide people with assistance and with essential humanitarian services. I think it's clear that in order to do things, people need to collect and process information. I think it's the extraordinary circumstances in which we find ourselves in today really call for action. I mean, we've seen also in the recent overview provided in by the UN on the progress on the SDGs, how things are not really going well at all, to use a euphemism. And so against this background, there is a clear need for action. But we often see with this need for action a hunt for solution and a faith in technology, data, and data exploitation as a solution for everything, and that is often or sometimes blind to the unintended consequences and implications that sometimes maybe even based on a wrong or even worse, no problem analysis. And sometimes we have the impression that we see this happening when we see, for example, the drive for a solution linked to target 16.9 by 2030 to provide legal identity for all, including birth registration. This is often translated in a rush to set up digital identity systems that are based on biometrics and forcing them onto people without much reflection on privacy and data protection. So is this a problem? Obviously it is, and the implications of this problem are somehow coming to the fore more and more. In Italy, we say the knots are coming to the comb, or the devil makes the pots but not the lids. Without going to the extreme circumstances and allegations that are widely reported and relating to the latest developments in Afghanistan, we have seen just recently, a couple of weeks ago or last week, the Kenyan High Court declaring the national identity system a proposal illegal due to data protection concerns. Similar concerns arising in multiple jurisdictions. In Switzerland, the Swiss population voted against a proposal for a digital identity system based primarily on concerns related to private undertakings being linked to this. So, digital identity is a very complex area, but at the heart of getting it right remains a clear problem analysis. And sometimes the question of, is it really necessary to make everybody's body machine readable, to make sensitive information available to so many people in order to solve a problem, is a question that should be asked from the beginning. We have seen this in the COVID-19 situation also emerging quite similarly, in fact, before saying that we need more data and we need to share it more, we need more surveillance, let's ask ourselves the question, what for? It's not just a rhetorical question, it is the very question that scientists like Carmela, that is here today, has asked themselves and forced people to ask themselves before developing tools that actually match the problem analysis. So, this work is fundamental. Whether digital contact tracing applications overall are a success or not, it's another question, but at least what Carmela's work clearly has done is to avoid a lot of damage being potentially done. So I think we really shouldn't forget that it's only trusted technology that can be successful technology. So data protection really is an essential enabler of trust, and it starts with the question of what are we doing this for?
Thanks, Massimo. And Mariana, obviously, from the North American organization states, there has been also a work in some principles that could be set as a framework for achieving trust. What could you tell us that we could have in common about these principles, and how can we build trust among all of us?
Thank you. Yes, well, the Organization of American States, as you all know, has 35 member states, not only from North America, also from Central, South America, and the Caribbean. And so this organization, within its Inter-American Juridical Committee, of which I am a member, has updated existing principles that we had already adopted in 2015. So after a process of consultation with states and with some international organizations, we've come up with an updated, annotated principles. This means that we've made a legislative guide for states like those in the American region, which are in process of either updating their existing data protection laws or which are adopting new data protection laws. So this document exists and is already a guide for states, as it has been already adopted by the Inter-American Juridical Committee. The fact that it has taken into account the comments received from states in our region means that it is also a reflection of common agreements among these states and of common principles or guidelines. And finally, we are expecting that these principles be adopted by the General Assembly of the Organization of American States next November, upcoming November, which is also a political step towards possibly one day reaching an international instrument, a binding instrument that we do not have yet in our region. It has been mentioned in prior panels this morning during the assembly that the Americas is a tricky region in the sense that there are many differences in advancements in technology in our region, and there's also many differences in the understanding of the risks, which is something that Carmela highlighted also. And so I think that this is an important step. And in a health emergency like the one we are living, these standards must be known not only by states, but also by the private sector. And this is where the work of the data protection authorities is essential. We have to balance the human right to privacy with the human right to attain the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health, which includes, according to international instruments, the obligation of states to take steps to prevent, treat, and control epidemic and pandemic diseases. But also there's a right to free flow of information, which is also enshrined as part of freedom of thought and expression. So this is about balancing. It's not about excluding. It's about finding a way to balance rights and make sure that any exceptions to privacy laws and privacy protections are enshrined in the law, follow a very detailed and careful consideration of all the risks involved, and are temporary and are necessary, proportional, and comply with all the applicable international standards, including the inter-American ones.
Thank you, Mariana. And Professor Carmela, I was hearing that all your work was covered in the use of technology and data and how to build trust. Can you comment on us of how can we better use the technology, or if even we should be using technology in some applications, and how we can build trust amongst it, and to actually use properly the technology so that it's become a benefit and a human rights enabler instead of something that actually could violate your privacy?
Yeah. So when we talk about building trust, we have worked a lot on trying to articulate what trust means and when people trust other things. And as I was saying in my first intervention, right, when people want privacy, what they really want is for their data not to be used against them in a way, right? Not to be used to surveil them, to manipulate them, to do any kind of intervention. And that's in general why we keep our information secret. Even as kids, when we lie to our parents to not tell them where we go with our friends, it's not really because we want to keep that private, it's because we don't want them to tell us don't go to the mall, because you want to go to the mall, right? You don't want an intervention. So at the end of the day, it's really about how people use the other information. So one way to build technology that really, really enables trust is to follow the purpose limitation principle that we are all very familiar with, and building technologies that can be used only for one purpose. And there exist technologies, privacy enhancing technologies that allow you to do that. And many times we just see, as I was saying before, them as a way to achieve privacy. But it's not only that, they really go beyond. When we build systems like, I'm going to again go for the contact tracing applications, and we build something that only could be used for one purpose, this purpose of notifying people. The data in the system, the data flows, do not enable for any other application. And that means that nor the apps nor the infrastructure is useful. And that means that, as Mariana was saying, now it's temporal. Because once this thing is over, there is no use for them, right? And these we can embed in the technology. But then as Massimo was saying, it really goes back to really have a purpose from the beginning, to really think back why we're doing this and not just deploy and find things on the fly, because then is when we build very big infrastructures with a very hard way to control. And once we cannot control it is when we lose the trust from users and from citizens, because they cannot really trust that this will not go against them. And then transparency is also a very important thing. It was essential for the contact tracing apps that the process was very open. We pushed a lot to make, and for the first time we made countries develop open source tool, like at a massive scale. And this is something that more and more needs to happen, and citizens also need to be more involved in this. And what we saw during the pandemic is that citizens really get involved when they actually feel that they are going to be oppressed. The apps was the reason Massimo now expressed, like the Swiss voting for the no ID. We also have Americans or the Brits voting for no ID. So it's not that the population does not care, right? But they need to be asked, and they also need to have to intervene.
Thank you, Professor. So if I'm kind of listening to you, everybody, right? And it's pretty much about the purpose. It's pretty much about a framework that builds trust. It's pretty much about thinking from the beginning what it should be this information use and how we can actually make that this information and this technology doesn't lose its purpose for what it was built for. So can you just help me and get me in one sentence, what do you think is the most fundamental thing that we should be worrying for the next couple of months, since the pandemic is finishing, and since that we are like building this thing, but we are still not sure when it's going to finish? What we should be doing with our info, and what governments, companies, and everybody should be pointing to in terms of privacy and in terms of just making everybody trust again on the technology. Mila, do you want to start? Do you want yes, please.
Sure. I think just based on what the fellow panelists have mentioned, if I have to put it one sentence, or two, first, I think we need to make sure that there is capacity, because from my experience, especially working in the developing and least developing countries, there is definitely a lack of capacity. And no matter what we talk about, high-level goals of building trust and building transparency, people don't even understand what transparency means, especially when you translate it into technologies. And many people in the developing countries or least developed countries don't even have access to to internet. And when they do, they definitely don't look at reading policies and understanding whether there is an issue. So it's kind of like a trade-off. Give me access to the internet, I'll give you all the data. And unfortunately, that's the reality. So I think before we talk about, obviously we need strong frameworks and we do need regulation, but we also need to have capacity to implement and enforce these types of regulations. And the people obviously need to understand what they're doing with this data. And currently there is a big lack of it, and hence there is not going to be trust until people actually understand what is happening. So we do need to have financial investments, and we do need to have more education and awareness to bring back to the populations. So I would say this is first and foremost, at least in addition to what has already been said. And then another thing is that, and it's kind of like a notion more of worry and caution, is data is important. And I think with this pandemic and the experiences we've been observing, there's, again, going back to the issue of trust, there's definitely less trust of it. And there's definitely less trust also in the science. And it all kind of got mingled in, science, privacy, technology, all got mingled together. So I think we need to go back to the roots of it and kind of really, again, rebuild the trust, repeating it. But we need to not stress so much about the harms, because a lot of the people are already aware of the harms. And while we're talking about the harms, we also need to stress and talk about the potential good and that data can bring, and figure out the solutions to use it for that good.
Thanks a lot, Mila. Massimo, same question for you.
Thank you. And to build on what Mila was saying earlier, empowerment for people to really have the capacity to understand and to engage is fundamental. To go back to what I was saying a little bit at the beginning, talking about our own experience in our small space, it's fundamental to really engage, to understand the implications of technology in the specific circumstances in which they're deployed, to ask oneself why a particular technology, what is the problem that we're trying to solve before we decide that it's a particular technology that is the solution. And then once there is guidance in relation to the responsible deployment of tools, it's a question also of being able to apply that guidance, because guidance sitting on a shelf gathering dust is of no use. So having proper training that is available for people in organizations to acquire the capacity to apply these principles and these policies, and tools to apply principles and policies, trainings that are available for civil society, because technology is complex, and maybe more and more individuals themselves, data subjects, will not really have the tools and the means to keep an eye on who's using the technology and keep them accountable. The role of civil society is fundamental. Research and development in technology is also essential, and research and development that is pushed by drivers that are linked to these concerns around privacy by design. I made the example of biometrics and the use of biometrics with digital identity systems. Well, biometrics as they are today, in the current state of the art, they're not fit for purpose for many of the circumstances in which they're being used. They're excessive by design, and so we need to do more to be able to, if we want to leverage data, if we want to make the most of it, as we are all convinced that we do, we need to make sure that the tools that we equip ourselves with actually enable us to use this technology without doing damage and harm. So it's a question of training, preparing, having solid accountability systems, having the capacity to do research and development, and to carry on keeping our ears on the ground to capture all the signals in advance and before big problems are caused.
Thank you, Massimo. And Mariana, do you think that there's something more to add from the point of view of the North American states and something concretely about Latin America in this situation, about building trust, implementing all the things that Mila and Massimo has been telling us?
Well, thank you. I just want to insist that the Organization of American States does not only have the North American states in it, and this is very important because it's something that I do want to call upon the Inter-American region to look towards, to check the principles, the updated principles, the annotated agenda. There are 35 states involved in this region. And I think that I fully agree with Mila and with Massimo in the challenges and in the importance of capacity and of training and tools. And of course, a legal framework in itself is not enough. So it needs enforceability and it needs to be able to be applied. So let's start with the legal frameworks at least. And here, please, I want to emphasize that the report on the Sustainable Development Goals for this year, 2021, has a whole chapter dedicated on the need to respond to an unprecedented demand for data. And so today, more than ever, the ethics and the responsibility in the way this data is collected and in the way this data is processed are more important than ever in all the countries in the whole world, and not only those countries that are more developed than others. So I think we need to work towards this, and this Inter-American tool is Inter-American principles is a tool towards this end.
Thanks a lot, Mariana. And Professor Carmela, do you think that there's anything to add about, since from your point of view in the implementation, the enforcement, the development, the trust, and actually to make everybody comfortable and with a meaningful insight of what privacy should be on the technology and its use?
So again, I think that people have the right to demand solutions that are actually more purpose limited and that are not based on massive collection of data and indiscriminate use. And in that sense, you started this round of questions saying, what should we think in the next 2 months as the pandemic disappears? And I really hope it's only 2 months more, right? And I think that what we should think about is that we should not normalize surveillance. The last 2 years have brought to us a lot of technologies from our job space, where it became normal to just surveil employees via, programs, to education, where it became normal to just surveil pupils and students while they do exams, while they do their homework, to all of these applications about tracking citizens. And we should, I hope, leave this pandemic by taking that this surveillance is not a normal thing. We should not normalize it. We should not accept the fact that these kind of technologies are needed. Humanity has worked for a long, long time without having a watchdog, and we still kind of survived and actually had rights and things, and we should not lose it just because technology is here and make things something easier. So that would be my takeaway. Let's not normalize surveillance. It's not normal and it's not democratic.
Thanks a lot, Professor. I want to thank all our panelists for their participation today and their patience with the technical issues that we were having. It was obviously an interesting discussion that it should be longer and we can discuss for hours, but for time's sake and for the respect for the panelists, because obviously some of us are in really late in the other parts of the world. I just want to thank you in the name of INAI for your participation and obviously for your views and your knowledge. Thanks a lot, and have a good night and good evening for all of you.